Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wendy Navarez, and it's truly an honor to welcome all of you here tonight. I proudly served the Navy for over a decade, and what I learned were a lot of lessons that guided me every day since then. Service before self, integrity in all things, and the understanding that no mission is successful without teamwork and trust. Those are some of the values of why I'm here today and a part of Principles First, because that unites us. It's not about politics. It isn't about politics or party. It's about principles. It's about our shared belief that truth matters, that character matters, and that facts are not negotiable. That's what Principles First represents, a movement grounded in honesty, accountability, and respect for the rule of law. Tonight is a reminder that democracy depends on courage, the courage to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, to lead with integrity even when it's unpopular, and to put country and community above self-interests. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching. That's the kind of leadership that our nation needs. Principled leadership. Principled leadership that puts service above self and principles above politics. And tonight, it's not just a dinner. It's a reminder that real change begins here in these rooms. People still believe in listening, in reasoning, in decency, and in the truth. So as we share this evening together, I encourage each of you to connect with one another. Connect with someone new, with an idea that challenges you or the purpose that brought you here today in the first place. Thank you for being here, for standing for truth, for decency and democracy, and for one another. And now I want to introduce my co-chair of Principles First North Carolina, Melinda Bells, also my friend. She previously served the people of Huntersville for a total of 12 years as both the commissioner and the mayor, leading with integrity, transparency, and a deep commitment to her community. She continues to be a voice of honesty, principled leadership, and an inspiration for all who believe in putting people before politics. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Melinda.
Thank you. Thank you. When I look around this room this evening, and I see people with vast different life experiences, and yet there's this thing that has woven us together. This thing called integrity, honesty, facts matter. How many of you in this room believe our Constitution matters? Yeah, I don't think you would be here at a Principles First event if you didn't. But there is something to be said when people who believe in the very foundation of who we are gather together. We're breaking bread. We're engaging in conversation. Does that mean every single one of us believe exactly the same way? No, it does not. I guarantee you there's not one person in this room that we are all in 100% lockstep with. But I do know if you're sitting in this room, you believe in the Constitution, the rule of law, and holding our elected leaders accountable to both. Every single. So, we are going to kick off our evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. So, if you will please join us and rise. I pledge allegiance
to the choir, United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, through liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and you may be seated. So I have to take the glasses off because now I can read. But I do have the honor and the privilege this evening of introducing you to Principles First Executive Director, Brittany Martinez. Brittany is a political strategist and California native with extensive experience working for Republican members of Congress and on political campaigns. Martinez spent half a decade working for Speaker McCarthy in both his minority leader and Speaker's office. Prior to that, she served as a communications director for the U.S. Senate campaign, deputy director of Hispanic media at the Republican National Committee, and held other roles on Capitol Hill. So if you will please join me in welcoming Brittany Martinez.
Hi, everybody. Ooh, that was loud. So I know we want to get to our amazing panelists and speakers, so I'll be brief. But I just want to let you know a little bit more about Principles First. For some of you, this might be your first time interacting with us, and that's amazing. Maybe a friend brought you here. Maybe it was a neighbor. But ultimately, Principles First started as counter-programming to the extreme nature that CPAC was becoming back in 2019. And it started at Applebee's and Chili's and little congregations of folks around the country, of 5 people, and here we are in North Carolina, and we have this beautiful venue, and we get to have some amazing speakers who are going to be talking about Constitution, rule of law, and why that is so important to us in the founding of our nation. And when we think about Principles First, our big thing is our annual summit every year. Happens in February. We officially announced it's happening at the Gaylord in National Harbor, February 20th to the 22nd, which is funny because speaking of CPAC, they weren't able to fill those seats last year, but we will. So we're very much looking forward to that. So you should come. It'll be fun. But I think, in my bio, obviously, Republican. Big R, big red, Republican. And I'm still a Republican today. A disgruntled one, though, and I'm not okay with what I see happening with administration. And our organization started right of center, but we've grown beyond that. We have people who are on the left, and they're kind of frustrated with their leadership. We have folks who are independents. And I think what really brings us all together is just our love for this country and our desire to make it better. And we're not the type of people who like extremes. And guess what? That's where the majority of this nation lives, is in the middle. So what we want to do is provide a home for you. If you say, man, these Republicans or these Democrats, they're just driving me wild, well, we agree with you. That's why we're here. And so we hope that you'll enjoy what our wonderful speakers and panelists have to say, and a little bit about us and our growth. At the beginning of this year, we had our biggest summit ever, over 1,200 attendees. And now we have state chapters in half the states. We had 0 chapters as of March. Now we're in half of the states, and my goal is for us to be in all 50 next year. And I have to give it up to our volunteers. We can't do this without them. I like to say Principles First is 99.999% national grassroots volunteer power, and I am the one paid staffer. So putting up this banner, getting all of the orders for food, that does not get done without our amazing volunteers. So if you can just join me, please giving them a round of applause. And they're not just doing it here, they're doing it all over the country and in every state next year. And so if you like what we have to say, please think about joining us and joining your local state chapters. And without further ado, I'll bring Wendy back up here to start the next panel, introduce the next panel.
And I just want to say that I am very appreciative of my co-chair because I am still in the thralls of parenthood. So I got twins that turned 10 on Monday. So I would like to introduce former acting AG Stuart Gerson. He is a distinguished attorney, former senior U.S. Department of Justice official, and respected advocate for the rule of law. He served as the acting U.S. Attorney General in 1993 during the transition between the Bush and Clinton administrations. Following his appointment as Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division under President George H.W. Bush, earlier in his career, he served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., and as a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Air Force. As head of Civilian Division, he oversaw major cases involving financial, health care, and defense fraud, environmental and mass tort litigation, and the government's response to the First World Trade Center bombing. In private practice, he serves as of counsel at Epstein, Becker, and Green, focusing on healthcare, regulation, cybersecurity, and complex fraud litigation. He has also led major pro bono and constitutional cases, including challenges to executive overreach. Gerson is a founding member of Checks and Balance, a group of conservative lawyers dedicated to defending democratic institutions, and serves on the board of directors of the Society for the Rule of Law. A frequent commentator on Supreme Court and DOJ issues, he writes the SCOTUS Today series on LinkedIn. He holds degrees from Penn State University and Georgetown University Law Center and continues to advise clients and policymakers on matters at the intersection of law, policy, and public trust. Please give a warm welcome to former acting AG Stuart Gerson.
It's nice to come to your own funeral, hear the youth.
Okay, we're on. Thank you. So, Mr. Former Acting Attorney General Stuart Gerson, Mr. Gerson, also, he said I could call him Stuart. Thank you so much for being here. And I think a lot of people will feel this way when I say, if I can have like a quarter of the career that you have had and live the life that you've had, I think I'll have lived a good life. So thank you so much for all of your work, for being a public servant, and your dedication to rule of law and Constitution, first and foremost.
Well, thank you. I hope it's not over.
No, absolutely not. And we hope to have you, just for your guys' situational awareness, we were able to have Mr. Gerson with us earlier this summer. We had a great event in Washington, D.C. Hope to have you a lot more. But I think he's quite the type of person that we look for when we're talking about all these principles.
His name is North Carolina. He's a Gillis here. Go on and tell it.
Small suburban town on the ocean. It's off Long Island. And I first heard of UNC because the basketball coach at my high school played at UNC. And he played cards with my father. His name was Bob Gerson. I knew who he was. Then he would help recruit a couple of people from my town to play at Carolina. The first was somebody you never heard of named Billy Hathaway, who's great. He played in the 50s on the first team that Frank McGuire had when he came here. Billy's great skill was that he was 6'11" and weighed almost 300 pounds. But my around the corner neighbor and boyhood friend, still a friend, was Larry Brown, and I paid a lot of attention to him when he was at Carolina and coached 17 different teams and countries as he was around. I've tried cases here. And I learned a lot about North Carolina in doing that. The federal districts in North Carolina are stretched out because of the shape of the state. And when you try a case, say in Winston-Salem, which I've done, you get jurors who've come from 100 miles to go to court. And when you spend a lot of time picking a jury, which I've done there, with a judge who's highly antagonistic to the defense that I was attempting successfully to mount, you learn a lot about it. I was the general counsel of the National Republican Senatorial Committee on a couple of cycles. And again, North Carolina is an interesting state. There are other states that have this dynamic. But with the Research Triangle and the growth in North Carolina, you have tremendous in-migration. At the same time, you have traditional interests that are agricultural, that date back to the beginning of the case, and you're still fighting that battle. It makes North Carolina very interesting. The battle over redistricting here is a micro. I won't talk a lot about it, but it's a microcosm of what we're seeing, and all of this affects the law. I mean, this is pertinent to what I'm going to talk about here today. This is principles first. Unfortunately, in Washington, we have too many people who evidence principles nowhere, and it's true on both sides of the aisle. We have a Congress who thinks that it's a parliament, not the adversarial branch that the framers had intended. And so when I point to the weak branch, it's not the executive. The executive always seeks power. The courts actually are doing a pretty good job. I'm an amicus in at least 25 cases from the Supreme Court on down, and I'm counsel in a number of these as well. The judges are doing very, very good jobs, except in a few cases where you can argue Trump in the United States is a difficult case to deal with. The voting rights case that was argued this morning is another case that has interesting repercussions here. But it's the Congress that's the weak branch, and it was intended to be the strong branch. So that's an introduction by way of that I'm here. I believe I know the territory a little bit, and I look forward to an exchange with any of you who's interested in talking to me. I'm staying the night.
You're not going anywhere. So, as we start into this first question, what do you see as the most pressing challenges facing local and national governance today?
Well, in my neck of the woods, the most pressing challenge that local governments are facing is that the federal government's trying to govern them. And when you see ice on the streets of the town that you live in, you think of stormtroopers. It's a terrible environment. We have maids who work for us who clean our house, and they're part of a business that was started by an immigrant woman with a lot of intelligence and energy, and virtually everybody who works for her maintenance company, which is all over Washington. She employs hundreds of people. Virtually all of them are immigrants from some Latin American country. You have to work on your Spanish to get anything done with any of them, but they're typical of people who've come here. My family didn't originate here. They've been here for 150, 175 years, but they weren't any different from these Latin Americans who are here now. And so in the locality, we see the federal government reaching into things that the federal government, supposedly federalists, have never delved in before. As far as the broader issue is concerned, Principles First is a good name for what we ought to be thinking about. We've grown much too passive. We've grown much too unchallenged in what we do. Our children are not being educated with rigor. You see people who know very little about the way our government works, and yet they vote in elections and go with the wind. So much that we do, particularly among our national leaders, is transactional, not based on principle, any principle. I mean, none of this stuff is received wisdom from the divine. There's always room to argue these important public issues, but we're really not doing it. We're succumbing to people whose governing philosophy is essentially driven by biases. And that's I'm not condemning one party. I mean, the whole system needs work. Anyway, that's the best answer I can give to your question.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And we got to hear very much, just a little bit about your very distinguished career. I feel like it was a different generation of politics and politicians back then.
Let me say something about
Sure.
that. I was born in 1944, so right at the end of World War II. And World War II was the motivating public issue when I was a kid growing up. I lived in a small town. We had a Congressional Medal of Honor winner in our town, a guy named Michael Valenti. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War I. And you can read these citations. They're all on the internet. Amazing bravery, amazing stupidity. And, all he could do, he was so injured that his job was being the janitor in the firehouse. He didn't have the physical or mental capability to do anything more. But we had a Memorial Day parade every year, and Michael Valenti would lead the parade. The whole town would come up and stand to attention. That's was the mentality when I grew up, and it was country. It was country first, and race wasn't important, religion wasn't important. It was about being an American. We've lost that. We have a very divided society. People are locked into self-interest and don't have any principles at all, let alone putting them first. So what do we need to do as a nation? We need to educate our children better. We need to involve them in public service at an early time. I favor rewarding people for public service in public life, maybe with a tax benefit or something else. We ought to acknowledge it. There are a lot of heroes out there, men and women, and they ought to come to the forefront. But we have too many people who are just along for the ride. I know it's not any of you, but to the extent that you can get people to engage, vote intelligently, speak up, stand up, we'll do better. We've been here before. I mean, this is 1938. This is 1968. Will we survive it? I don't know. We're not at our strongest right now.
I want you guys to start thinking of questions. So when we open up to the audience in just a second, but when someone comes to you and says, I'm just kind of I'm just an everyday American, you know, I don't really know anything about politics. This isn't my thing. I don't like it. I've been starting to pay attention. What advice would you give them to help check the exec?
Stay committed and find friends. You know, you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
You know, as I came from a small town. If you would have ever told me when I was a boy that I would be friends with a couple of people who were presidents, people I could call on the telephone and speak with first President Bush. We talked all the time. We socialized. We did everything. It's nonsense for a kid like I was. My family wasn't prominent in anything. Same thing is true with, I was always interested in the Supreme Court. From a little kid, when I was 10 years old, Brown against the Board of Education was decided. This was really interesting to me, and I became a court buff. I know virtually all of the justices of the Supreme Court. That's nuts. But if I can be involved at the level that I am, anybody can. I think that's what it proves. It's just a question of commitment, being willing to do the work. You know, I started in federal service by going into the military. I was a counterintelligence officer in the military. There's some question on your list that says, you know, what in your career was so influential, or what did you take from it? When I was in the service in the Vietnam era, I was sent to Korea after the Pueblo was seized. I don't know if people remember that, but it was an important intelligence disaster for the United States. And it never happened again, so I must have been good at the job. But I had men working for me who were old enough to be my father. And that's where I had gone to law school. I was 22 when I graduated law school. I'd gotten ahead of myself somehow. Suddenly I'm in a situation where men who were much older than some of them had children that were my age. I was responsible for their lives, order, well-being. You wake up, but you also, if you do the one thing that you need to do, which is just listen to people who know more than you do, you come out of it all right. And that's where I learned to try cases in front of a jury and in events that had nothing to do with trials or law. It's why I won lots of cases. You talk about things have changed, you know, things that are transactional. I have one incident or item that has always stood out in my mind. When I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I had done pretty well, and the two U.S. attorneys I worked for, three actually. One of them was Tom Flannery, who came down here and presided in the cases that had to do with all the racial disturbances that had occurred in the 70s. They needed an outside judge, and he served with distinction with regard to some of these prosecutions. But Tom Flannery and I knew Bob Gates very well, and Bob Fisk, who was a U.S. attorney in New York, and Earl Silbert, who was one of the original Watergate prosecutors, and got me involved in Watergate. I litigated the very first Watergate case that had to do with checks that were funding the Watergate break-in folks. But in the course of that, right around that time, I was the prosecutor in a criminal case brought against a sitting United States senator, Daniel Brewster of Maryland. And he was a longstanding Democrat senator, had a lot of pull, and his lawyer was Edward Bennett Williams, probably the best trial lawyer of the 20th century, I think. And I got to know him very well and admired him. But he was very politically prominent. And he decided one day that he would go to the Justice Department and use his considerable pull to get the case against this senator dismissed, have the government walk away from it. I was relatively recently, a couple of years back from the service, serving as an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. And I'd never been inside the main justice building at that time, but I was called to a meeting with the head of the criminal division. The head of the criminal division was a man, and had been for a long time, named Henry Peterson. To show you what kind of a man Henry Peterson was, the Justice Department Award for Integrity is called the Henry Peterson Award. Ed Williams came with a number of his associates, a couple of whom had been Supreme Court clerks, and the United States was represented by one person, me. And when I got to the meeting where all these people were to talk about whether this case would survive, Henry Peterson came into the room, shook hands with everybody, and asked me to join him in his office. And he asked me about the case, and I said, we have a righteous case. I had just turned a witness who was going to be very helpful. We had guidance. This case had been to the Supreme Court in an earlier iteration. We had some useful guidance there, and I said, we're prepared to go forward, and we should. He said, thank you very much. He walked with me back to the room where everybody was. He turned to Edward Bennett Williams, the greatest lawyer of his time, and said, Mr. Williams, thank you for coming. That was the end of the meeting. That's the way the Justice Department used to work. That's not the way that it works today. And too much is transactional. I say with great sadness that we've had some discussion. I'm an amicus in a case involving the former director of the FBI, which is a vengeful prosecution in my opinion. But today, an equally vengeful prosecution was initiated against my friend John Bolton, who is very conservative, was my predecessor, my immediate predecessor as head of the civil division. And it's hard to be to the right of me, but he probably is. And both of us were certainly Republicans long before the president was a Republican. And we're both conservatives, which this administration is not. You know, I learned about conservatism from the like of William F. Buckley, that believing in a free market, a powerful United States, and a government that abstains from action as much as it can, a government of a limited government. There's nothing that resembles any of that in the current administration. On the other hand, there's very little that represents a true loyal opposition on the other side. I mean, I hear Democrats all the time who don't know how to speak to the people they purport to represent. So we're in a fix. So to go back to your first question, Brittany, it's to tell you, if you're not already, get involved and get your children and get other people involved. There's a lot to be done. When the Constitutional Convention ended its work, Benjamin Franklin was accosted by a woman, this is a famous story, and asked, well, what have you given us? And Benjamin Franklin's famous answer was, a constitution, if you can keep it. And that was a good message then, in the late 1700s. It's a good message today. We've got work to do, folks. That's a lot of...
Yes.
That's a lot of wind for a simple question.
No, but I mean, I think it's so important, especially as we approach the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. So I thank you for giving that a really good explainer. Audience questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, Mr. Gerson. I understand that towards the end of your tenure as Attorney General, Waco occurred. And I'm of the opinion that political violence has been a part of United States history for quite some time. But I wonder if you see there's a trend today that is unique to today, or is pushing us towards something in the future. Generally, political violence and how you see it fitting into society.
That's a really tough question to answer, because for one thing, I don't know the answer. I mean, I know that, for example, the Medal of Freedom winner of the other day doesn't strike me as somebody that I'm in favor of, but I certainly don't accept the idea that he could be the victim of violence. Waco is an interesting proposition. I would. That was a case where the government didn't do a very good job, where the events of Waco occurred on a Sunday morning. I had been involved in the solution of the first World Trade Center bombing immediately before Waco, and I was in the FBI, what's called the SIOC, the headquarters, the secured facility of the FBI within the Justice Department on a Sunday morning, and listened live to the shooting and the deaths in Waco, where the David Koresh and his people had the high ground and could easily shoot the ATF agents who were coming up thinking it was a circus. And it was an unplanned event, and it was a disaster. But thereafter, there were a lot of things to do. President Clinton was in office at that time, and he and I, that's where we really got to know each other. There were lots of children there, and I would go to work every morning, and my wife would say, "Don't kill any children today," and she was serious about it. And fortunately, we didn't, although there was an unfortunate end to that. Where should, what is the state of violence? I mean, I remember that I was on my way to a debate tournament. I was in college in 1963, and I was on my way to a debate tournament in a car with the other members of the debate team and a coach who was driving us. And we listened on the radio to the reports from Parkland Hospital telling us that John F. Kennedy had died. Of course, there's the tradition of Lincoln, and there have been other times when there's been violence. Whatever there is in that nature is too much. That's all that I can say. I know of no dispute that entitles somebody to kill his opponent. And is it worse now than it's ever been? I think we're on edge. I mean, I really dislike the idea of poorly trained National Guard troops being sent into inner cities. Tactically, it's a dumb thing to do. Politically, I also think it's a dumb thing to do. But we'll see. We're going to have a congressional election in a year and a half, and we'll see what happens. North Carolina is a terrific laboratory to figure these things out because the state is so evenly divided. The congressional delegation goes one way, the governorship is and always has been, or pretty much always has been, the other way. The Barack Obama, if you can believe it, is the only presidential candidate in recent memory that carried North Carolina on the Democratic side. So what are we going to see? I mean, we see these tariffs that are costing us jobs and economic growth. We're seeing the abolition of USAID, which kicks Carolina farmers in the stomach because they've lost their markets for surplus agricultural goods. So people who the administration claims to represent are not being helped by current policy. And a lot of that has to do with law enforcement and the state of the law and what's getting argued. We're going to survive this? I imagine that we will. I mean, we talk about the written Constitution. We have the oldest continuing written Constitution in the world. So we're a very young nation, but we've been through a fair amount, and I'm hopeful, expected that will continue. But I think we're challenged right now when you add automation, computerization to the mix, and the loss of white-collar jobs that will result from this. We're in a very transitional time concerning the way we govern ourselves. It isn't going to be what we have now, but it isn't going to be what we've had in the recent past either. So, North Carolina, I think, is divided in a way that it's at the forefront of a lot of these issues. So you who live here will be participants in that. You who live elsewhere ought to be participants in things that relate to public policy, public issues, and the quality of people. If your congressman isn't taking his role or her role seriously, there needs to be a change of employment.
Another question?
I'm curious what advice you would give to those that have to choose which battles to pick legislatively today. If you had to say there are two priorities, where would you say they should spend their time?
It's a tough question to answer. I mean, I think the answer has to start with character. You know, we have people who are running for office who are in it for themselves. They like the prestige. They like being controversial. They like putting on a show. We have all too many people who are like that. As I say, it begins. You know, I think about, you know, go back to 1963. Martin Luther King speaking at the Washington Monument, talking about that he was uninterested in the color of people's skin. He was interested in the content of their character. He was actually quoting somebody else, Thomas Sowell, who was a professor in California. But the thought is there. I think that's where you have to start. Does the man or woman who you're considering doing for something have character? Will that person stand up when the tide is running against him or her? Will they be what John F. Kennedy called a profile in courage, or will they be just another person looking good, dining out well, and being courted by lots of people? I think it's got to start there, and then it has to start with soundness on the issues. I mean, what are people for? What are they going to get? What are they going to work for when they get there? You have to answer all these things. There are both Republicans and Democrats who measure up, and there are both Republicans and Democrats who clearly don't. And never the twain shall meet. I think the answer is that you and people like you. One person can't do much. It's a tough society. There are a lot of internet influencers and the like of that, and they have a role. It's pretty easy to reach an audience these days. So, of course, most of it's about nonsense. I do like Taylor Swift. It's easier for her to sell a million record albums or 3 million record albums in a week than it is for somebody with sound political views to make a case for reasonable, compassionate change in the United States. So you have to ask and answer those questions. But you knew that before I said anything at all. And that's what you have to do. And you have to get like-minded people together, and you have to work. I mean, if we're sitting back on our backsides just complaining, we're not getting anything done. And we need to take charge of our society. And I mean everybody.
Our time is just about up. So before we let you go, any parting words and wisdom you'd like to bestow upon us? No pressure.
I wish everybody well. We're coming into a hard political season. We have conditions in the country that need to be met. I'm sure you're all good people. The fact that you show up here shows that you have some level of concern in public issues. I commend your organization, one of several that I have dealt with, and we need lots of people like that. Now you're here, so that's nice. But it's the people who aren't here who you're going to help get to the next one that matter.
Former Acting Attorney General Stuart Gerson, thank you so much for joining us.
I've always wanted to do a mic drop. Like the singing.
We'll have to pay.
But I don't want to break the thing. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
There we go. So we are going to shift a little, some gears. And I would like to move into our panel discussion. So as I introduce our panel, please come forward, or actually come on up. Come on up and grab a seat. And I'm going to introduce you first to Chief Justice Cheri Beasley. She is a distinguished former jurist, law professor, and mediator whose career reflects a deep commitment to justice and public service. She began her judicial career in 1999 as a district court judge in Cumberland County, later serving on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and in 2019, becoming the first African-American woman to serve as Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. And as Chief, yes. As Chief Justice, Beasley guided North Carolina's courts through hurricanes, the COVID-19 pandemic, and a period of racial reckoning, while modernizing court technology and expanding access to specialty courts. She worked to address bail disparities and build partnerships with schools and faith leaders to strengthen communities. She earned her BA from Rutgers University, a JD from University of Tennessee, go Vols, sorry. Had to get that in there. And an LLM from Duke University. We knew that was going to happen. A recipient of numerous awards, Beasley was the 2022 Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, a 2023 Harvard Kennedy School Resident Fellow, and now serves as the inaugural Justice Sandra Day O'Connor Professor at Elon University School of Law and as President. Please welcome former Chief Justice Cheri Beasley. Now I would like to invite up former Justice Robert Orr. Robert Orr is a distinguished jurist, constitutional scholar, and civic leader whose career reflects a deep commitment to the rule of law and principled public service. He served as a justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court from 1995 to 2004, following earlier service on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. He also served with the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era before beginning his legal career in private practice and public service. After leaving the bench, Justice Orr became the founding executive director of the North Carolina Institute for Constitutional Law, where he led efforts to promote constitutional governance, economic liberty, and governmental accountability. Imagine that, governmental accountability. He has remained an influential voice in North Carolina's legal and civic communities, frequently writing and speaking on judicial independence, ethics in public life, and the importance of principled leadership. Justice Orr continues to be active in mentoring young lawyers, participating in civic and educational initiatives, and engaging in bipartisan efforts to strengthen democratic institutions and restore public trust in the courts. He is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Wake Forest University Law School. Welcome, Justice Orr. And last but certainly not least, please welcome Professor Shane Stansbury. Shane Stansbury is a professor at Duke University School of Law, where he teaches primarily in the areas of criminal law and national security law. Shane previously served for nearly a decade as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, where he led some of the office's most sensitive and noteworthy prosecutions in the areas of terrorism, cybercrime, espionage, and money laundering. He served in several leadership capacities at DOJ and received numerous awards for his work as a prosecutor, including the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award and the Federal Law Enforcement Foundation's Prosecutor of the Year Award. Shane is active in a variety of efforts relating to the integrity of the courts and the rule of law. He sits on the Leadership Council of the Balch Judicial Institute and is a longtime member of the North Carolina Bar Association's Judicial Independence Committee. And before his federal service, he practiced at WilmerHale, focusing on international litigation, anti-corruption investigations, and constitutional matters before the Supreme Court. He clerked for Judge M. Margaret McCowan of the 9th District and Judge Robert W. Sweet of the Southern District of New York. Professor Stansbury earned his J.D. from Columbia Law School, an M.P.A. from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, and an A.B. from Duke University. Please welcome Professor Stansbury. Now give me a minute to flip back over to my questions. All right. So we have a distinguished panel with us this evening. And I have some questions that I'm hoping that they can answer for us. You know, tonight, the title of tonight's event is Courts and Consequences. So how do you explain to ordinary citizens why independent courts matter, not only for politicians or government officials, but for everyday Americans who may feel disconnected from the judicial process? Chief Justice Beasley.
I am delighted to be here this evening. And you know that courts matter, right? And you know it's really important for courts to be independent. As I was listening to the former Attorney General, I was thinking about, in so many ways, in tandem, how courts have really worked with other branches of government and really with people's rising up around the issues that they care about. It is important that courts are independent. The courts, in my mind, in so many ways, are the place, literally, that justice happens. And it's certainly true that courts have not always been independent, but I do think, generally speaking, courts have responded to the pulse of the times in incredible ways. And judges are, like lawyers, generally good and really strive to do the right thing. I think we often hear about difficult things and bad things that happen in courts and with lawyers, but courts really have, the work of the courts really has really pushed our society forward in so many really key and critical ways.
Well, first let me say it's a treat to be here, and I'm sorry Heath Mayo, who was sort of the founder of Principles First, couldn't make it. It's organizations like this that are becoming more and more critical to the issues this country's facing, and so I just want to thank them and Heath in absentia for all that they're doing. And let me have one caveat. My wife had knee replacement surgery this morning. Cheri said, "Why are you here and not at the hospital?" Which is a good question, but I'm actually waiting to see when she's going to be discharged. So if I look at my phone, I'm not being rude to anyone. I'm just trying to stay current with what's going on. I think it becomes more and more challenging these days, and we're gonna talk about this, I think, later. To get the public to believe in an independent judiciary. I think it's a challenge. And, you know, the average citizen's experience in court isn't with the Supreme Court or the federal courts. You know, it's usually the district court, either on a speeding ticket or a divorce proceeding or something along those lines. And in large part, it's an educational necessity for those of us who are concerned about an independent judiciary and democracy to really try and educate not just the public generally, but starting in our schools with programs that explain to young people the critical nature of an independent judiciary as one of the three branches of government. And so we all have a responsibility, but I think we all have an increasingly difficult challenge to make the case.
I also want to thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming. This is wonderful to be a part of this. And I also am up here a little bit sheepishly because I've looked up to both of these individuals for a long time. So it's really my honor to be up here with you. I guess in answer to your question, I think about it in a couple of different ways. One is what's the message and how do you get that message out? And the other is who's the messenger? And I think on the latter question, I think we all have different roles to play. I think average citizens can play a role. Lawyers have a big role to play, and judges have a role to play. I agree with Justice Orr that we need to think about courts not as a monolith, but also there's also just very different types of courts. People look at their news feed and they see the latest Supreme Court controversy, but others, are going and try to resolve a traffic ticket, and those are different experiences, and people experience them in different ways. I think our biggest, or sort of our best way of sort of protecting the independence of the judiciary is sort of separating those out and really working on the latter front. Most people, if you look at the research, more than 50% have never encountered a court, even for jury duty, right? So they don't really know, other than what's on TV, what judges are about or what they do, right? And then those who do encounter the courts, sometimes their only experience with it, particularly in with poorer populations, people that are encountering the police more often, it's a bad experience, right? And compounded by the fact that sometimes those experiences result in unnecessary fines, right, for being late or not showing up, or their license being revoked, or things like that. So I think that we need to sort of step back and also realize that it's not just about, making sure that people appreciate the independence of the judiciary, but also making sure people have a good experience with the court, right? And that can be done, through some court reforms. That can be done with judges getting into high schools. They can be messengers. You could have court, in schools, right? Proceedings. So I think the more that people have experiences with the court, that is kind of where the magic might happen.
Very good. So then my next question, and I think I might know some of the answer that you're going to give, but how important are state courts in relation or compared to federal courts in protecting constitutional norms, especially when trust in national institutions is waning?
You want to start?
Judge Orr?
Yeah. Okay. I'm a huge proponent of state constitutions, but more so today as we see the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal court punting issues back to the state courts. And so the state courts are going to be taking on and are taking on more and more hot button issues, but also state constitutions provide greater rights than the federal Constitution. In North Carolina, under our Leandro decision, there's a constitutional right for a sound public education, basic education. And so hopefully that's not the hospital calling. All right. Anyway, so I do think state courts are increasingly important, although historically they've always been important, but more so now, and which leads probably in later questions to how we select and retain judges, which is a huge issue. But it's the bulk of litigation, the bulk of cases are going to be decided by the state courts. And you've been a district court judge, right? So you know better than any of us.
Yes.
All right.
I also think that people shouldn't think about federal courts as sort of hierarchical. They're federal, and then there are state courts, and they serve different purposes and different functions. And it's true that the constitutional protections under state and federal constitutions offer different kinds of protections. But the other piece, too, is that because the courts do serve different kinds of functions, you have to know that you're going to get different kinds of things from these courts. And so I don't know that there's a better court necessarily. Usually the filing happens and lawyers think through how to litigate cases based on the remedies sought. And sometimes there may be duality. And so there may be an opportunity to file in federal or state court, or federal and state court, depending on what the cases are. So there often is duality, and it is, state courts are clearly deeply important. And the other thing too is it is not uncommon for cases to come before the North Carolina Supreme Court, for example, and for an amazing justice to write a dissent. And for the Supreme Court of North Carolina to take that case up, or three, and wax eloquently about the case. So many of these issues that you see that are, because more cases do come before state courts and state high courts, often the federal issues that you see around, or the nationalization of issues that you see, often those issues arise through state courts.
I would never pretend to add anything to what these two can offer at the state court level. I mean, the only thing I would add is that I think every state faces their own unique challenges, and we have different systems of selection across the country and different types of elections. Justice Orr, sort of alluded to this, but I think it's a really interesting dynamic we're living through right now, where that because of a lot of the chaos that's going on at the federal level, and because some issues like partisan redistricting and things like that are being pushed down to the state level, I think this is a very interesting time for state courts, and I think there's some real opportunities at the state level. That said, there are some headwinds, when we have, we're not changing our sort of election system in this state anytime soon. But there's, some real issues when we have, judges who are with a D or an R by their name, and they're expected to take off the red jersey or the blue jersey and put on a black robe, until the next election. And then we expect the public to believe that their decisions aren't partisan. That's a lot to ask of the public. And I'm not pretending to have all the right answers, but I think that, this is one of many structural issues that we're just going to have to confront, I think. And we have a long, road ahead of us.
I will just add one thing. Federal judges always made me nervous in litigating cases. I was much more comfortable in state court than going into some of these federal courts and dealing with those judges. Yeah.
So the North Carolina legislature just announced plans to redraw congressional districts again. It's the third major redistricting effort in as many years. So how do you interpret this latest move in light of Harper versus Moore and the Supreme Court's ruling on the independent state legislature theory? Shane?
What was the last part of the question?
It was, how do you interpret this latest move in light of Harper versus Moore and the Supreme Court's ruling on the independent state legislature theory?
Well, so for those who are not as familiar with the case, you have to sort of look back to, I guess, was 2019 case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court. Basically said that for partisan gerrymandering or partisan redistricting, that is a political question that is not justiciable by the federal courts, and so that left the North Carolina Supreme Court, among others, face that question, and others on this panel can speak to it better than I can. But the court in Moore found that it was justiciable at the state level. Then there was an election, 2020. Our Supreme Court reversed itself, went up to the Supreme Court, and there was this question arising that kind of also blended with some of the theories that were going on after the 2020 election when Trump's campaign was trying to challenge the results of the election, and that's based on this idea that in the federal Constitution you have an elections clause for federal elections that says that the state legislatures control the time, place, and manner of those elections, right? And so the independent legislature theory was that the state Supreme Court, which had heard this case, was actually not capable of hearing it because it was not justiciable by any court. Luckily, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case that you mentioned, said no, state courts can weigh in on those. That's not just up to the legislature to do whatever they want. Now, that's still a live issue. It's going to be complicated by the fact that, as was mentioned before, we had a Voting Rights Act case that was argued yesterday. It doesn't look promising for Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so we're probably going to see a lot of movement, not only the fact that they're planning on voting on it next week, but I would expect beyond that, even more efforts to engage in partisan gerrymandering. This is what I was saying, which is that issue, it's not going to be solved at the federal level, by the courts at least. It's going to have to be solved at the state level. I'm not completely optimistic that the current composition of this state Supreme Court is going to buy that argument. I think ultimately, and this is where I'll finish, is that this is a problem that is going to have to be solved by Congress, and it's going to be a hard slog, but I think we've got to fix this redistricting issue, this gerrymandering issue, and it's going to take all of us to pressure Congress to act on it. There was some effort in 2022, I believe, some movement towards that in the House, but I think it benefits no one to have this arms race that we're in right now.
I asked Cheri if I could jump in, and I didn't bring my soapbox, but this is an issue near and dear to my heart in a variety of ways. And I'm going to throw out a radical proposition on how we need to rethink the redistricting gerrymandering issue. The Rucho case, which was out of North Carolina, where the U.S. Supreme Court said that partisan gerrymandering is a non-justiciable political question. We're washing our hands. The states can do whatever they want to resolve this issue. So the case comes up here in North Carolina in the Harper case. You get one decision, Harper 2, court changes, rehearing, and you get a new decision that essentially mirrors the Rucho case and says there is no justiciable issue on partisan gerrymandering under the North Carolina Constitution. All right, so now I'm getting on my soapbox, and I have a self-interest because I brought a suit on behalf of a group of plaintiffs that is currently up at the Court of Appeals, and it's an entirely different constitutional proposition. And it goes back to when Harper 3 was argued, and Justice Mike Morgan asked the lawyer for the legislature, he says, I know it's not specifically in the state constitution, but do the people have a right to fair elections? And he danced all over the courtroom and never answered the question. And I don't think Harper 3 answered the question. And so the question that I think we need to be talking about is, do we have a constitutional right to fair elections? And by fair elections, in the context of this case, I'm talking about that government can't rig the election. And that's exactly what's happened and what is getting ready to happen. And it's happened in Texas and Missouri. And we think about gerrymandering as maps and geographical lines, etc. But it's really about individual elections. Every one of those congressional seats is a discrete election. And what, thanks to modern data and technology, whoever is drawing the map or creating the districts can use that information, and they know every pod, every building block, whether it's a precinct or a census block, they know to a degree certain that it's a 60-40 Republican precinct, it's a 50-50 precinct, or it's a 52-48 Democrat lean. And so if you know that, then it's not about drawing lines. It's about shifting voters into blocks that you know are going to produce a winner. And we saw that happen with the redistricting in Wiley Nichols' district, in Kathy Manning's district, Jeff Jackson's district. They were 3 toss-up districts. They go in, manipulate, put voters in, pull voters out, and voila, you get 3 landslide Republican victories in the next election. And I would ask this fundamental question. Does that not completely undermine the whole concept of democracy and representative government if the government can rig the election? And that's exactly what they're doing. And that issue is before the Court of Appeals. We'll see how they answer it. But I really would like more people talking about that question, because it's not where they draw the map lines. It's the consolidation of voters. And I had a Republican consultant tell me that he had 2,000 data points on every voter in the state. That means he knows more about you and me than we know about you and me. And so that in computer technology will allow them in the 1st district in North Carolina to move voters in, take voters out, and at least from a Las Vegas betting line or a Civitas partisan index, they're going to have a district that they're going to win virtually every single time. And to me, that's not a fair election. Now, I'll get off my soapbox and let Cheri go. Yeah.
So Professor Stansbury talked about how in 2019, Harper versus Moore was heard, and that court held that the issue was judiciable. I was the Chief Justice. And then there was an election, and he talked about the change in the makeup of the court, and then I was not Chief Justice. And then so the court, which never happens, even though I'm telling y'all you have trust in the courts, on the other hand, overturned itself, and found the issue not justiciable. So, and then Justice Orr mentioned Dixon versus Rucho. It was in Dixon versus Rucho where there's this case about whether or not there is political gerrymandering versus racial gerrymandering. And I dissented in that case. It went to the Supreme Court of North Carolina. It came back. I dissented when the court heard it again, and it went to the Supreme Court. And ultimately, it is because it came back, and now it took forever, that we were able to. The issue was almost moot at that time. By the time it came back, but there was a federal case in tandem at the same time, and so the court the federal court found that these were racial gerrymanders, and so it resolved the state case as well. So good things do happen the way they're supposed to happen. It just sometimes takes time. It also takes people like Justice Orr who is always bringing these cases, but it takes people like him who push systems. So it's not just the court; it is the state legislature, and all systems have to be pushed to do right, or else they just don't work. They don't function correctly. And the other piece of this whole gerrymandering issue is the Voting Rights Act, and once upon a time, not that long ago, this was a pre-clearance state where there are roughly 28 counties where there needed to be a pre-clearance to make sure that these districts were drawn the way they were supposed to make sure that people have a fair, and I would argue constitutional right to vote. And the Supreme Court held that there are no more racial reasons to worry about that silly little thing in gerrymandering, and so there is no more pre-clearance. And so now you have exactly the debacle that you just described.
Can I just add one comment, because these are two very powerful statements, and I want to add a data point on top of them. So there was a survey done of North Carolina voters, and turns out that more than 80% responded that they were opposed to partisan gerrymandering. More than 80%. More than 70% were Republican, or of Republicans said the same thing. So this is an issue that everybody can get behind. So if you think about an organization like this and about issues that people can get behind and pressure our elected officials on, this is one of them.
Yeah, and let me add on the Voting Rights Act. Those of us, who grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s, we're well aware of the discriminatory laws and policies that were in place for one reason: to keep African American citizens from having a right to vote. Cheri and I were on a panel at Catawba, and she was telling the story, and I'll let you tell it, about Henry Fry. But now the data, the computer technology is so sophisticated that they can say, oh, we're not going to consider race. But all they do is look at voting patterns, voting results, and as a Texas legislator said in a PBS interview, we know whether you're a member of the NRA or the NAACP. And so they don't have to go to race. They've got all of this other technology to glean voter intent and practices and experiences in order to achieve the same thing.
I think it's also really important to know that gerrymandering doesn't just impact people of color. People who live in rural communities are often disengaged in a way that people in urban communities are not. And so to have the people of your choice to elect in rural communities because of the gerrymandering often puts people who live in rural communities at a grave disadvantage.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in one to play off of that. The best amicus brief I ever read at the Supreme Court was about 8 pages long from Pender County in a redistricting case. And they said, we're divided into 6 different legislative districts, and we have nobody who cares about Pender County. We don't care whether we're represented by a Democrat or Republican. We just want somebody that represents Pender County.
Wow. So let's shift gears a little bit. Public confidence in the rule of law has declined sharply as many Americans believe justice is applied unevenly depending on one's power or politics. So how do we preserve the ideal of equal justice when high-profile cases and political rhetoric increasingly frame prosecutions or court rulings as weaponized or partisan? Chief Justice, they're handing it.
As I said before, courts have no institution, Congress or the executive branch, have ever worked singularly in bringing great results to communities. Over the course of the history of this nation, it's really been people pushing consciousness on all of our governmental institutions. And so there really is power in the people, and we shouldn't forget that. That's why it matters that everybody's here. There is power in that. I mean, the Warren Court decided Brown versus Board of Education in 1964. Nobody ever thought that the case would have come out in that way. And remember, while as we think about the goodness of this case over the course of history, at the time, it shook the nation. And so those decisions that shake the nation, and Dred Scott in 1892-ish, and a whole Warren Court of granting individual rights. Miranda was decided by the Warren Court. The Griswold case about contraception and the right to privacy. The Loving versus Virginia case, which allowed, prohibited miscegenation cases. And so, moving forward doesn't feel good all the time. Sometimes there's a real collaborative fight and effort to make sure that a society and the government and that all of us are being governed well. But those are always very contentious and uncomfortable times. If you feel uncomfortable now, this is a great time to be engaged. And each of us really has more power than we think we do. We're talking about everything else among our families and our friends. Each of us has an opportunity to impact the people around us. They trust your judgment about a whole lot of things. And so as we insist that government does better, that courts do better, that Congress does better, that the executive branch does better, that power really is, and I can well imagine that there will be people who are in this room who will be out there on Saturday expressing their concerns about what's happening in this nation. So why would anybody go out there, right? One quick story. Yep. My husband and I were in Portugal this summer, and there was an old King's rally. They happened all over the world. It happened right across the street from our hotel. So don't think that your voices, when you elevate them, singularly or collectively, don't matter, because they really do.
Well, I will say my wife has her sign for the rally, but will have to exhibit it from her bed with her foot above her head. But I think we're in a really challenging time when it comes to how we are viewing and categorizing judges. And this isn't a new phenomenon, but I think over the last 30 or 40 years. Now if it's a controversial case, the media is going to report it on a partisan breakdown. They will say the Republican judges or justices, the Democrats. You watch a confirmation hearing for federal judges, whether it's a district court judge, appellate, Supreme Court. Everybody wants a litmus test. No making a difference whether you're the Democrats or Republicans, you're putting up people that check the box. And I think we all believe that judges shouldn't be in boxes. They should be unpredictable. One of my real concerns is how predictable the U.S. Supreme Court is, how predictable the North Carolina Supreme Court is. I'll give a shout out to Justice Dietz in the Allison Riggs case. He took a very bold step in setting out what he thought was a correct application of the law in that case. And so whether it's in elections, whether it's in the appointment process, we politicize the nominees now, and I don't really think that was so much the case 30 or 40 years ago. And there then comes this expectation that Cheri referenced, I think, earlier on, where how dare you rule against our side? We elected you, or we were behind you in the appointment process. And I think it's a difficult time for judges and justices because of all of this partisan perspectives that are expected of them. But, we have to have organizations and groups in media looking at judges as independent individuals, trying to follow the law, discern the law, and not as members of the caucus. And, I think that's an insidious problem infecting the judiciary, both federal and state. And I don't think it's going to change easily. And I don't know what the answers are. I know you've been involved in some groups, I think, Professor.
If I could just jump in real quick, I completely agree with you on that. There are some, and the media does identify jurists by party affiliation. There are some judges who were appointed by Republican presidents who have made very fair decisions in this moment. Justice Amy Coney Barry has stepped out, and she got a lot of pushback when she didn't make the decision, vote in the way that people perceived that she should have voted. And so Justice Jackson the same way. And so we're often not going to hear about the judges who are really concerned with justice. And the other piece of that is there is a lot of rhetoric around it, and we also have seen how judges have been targeted. Federal judges have been targeted, but state judges have been targeted. Nobody have heard about the fact that there was a judge murdered in Chicago, right? But I'm sorry that federal judges are being targeted and their families. But I'm thankful that people are far more aware that there is a grave danger in the politicization of decision making by judges, and that people should not perceive that their work is like the work of Congress or the executive branch, where there should be a partisan connection. And I will offer this lastly, and this is hard for me to talk about, but when I was Chief Justice, I had security. And I had security because there were threats to me, there were threats to my family, to my staff. There were people calling the chambers nigger, on all these other words. And I'm so thankful to my staff to this day because they're just amazing. But to think about the fact that I had to have security. My sons were away at college. Each of them had twin sons. They had security as well, and my husband. And I had security on the U.S. Senate campaign. So this rhetoric really can be very dangerous. But I've been beautifully surprised, regardless of how our judges have come to be either appointed or elected, that they have stood in independence in great part and really made independent decisions, the kind that you would be proud of.
That leads me to another question that I do want to ask, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So be thinking about that. But there is immense concern about the use of prosecutions for political retaliation. Whether it's James Comey or Lolita James, how do we draw the line between legitimate investigations and vindictive prosecutions meant to intimidate political opponents? And on top of that, what role should the courts play in checking that abuse of power?
I'll take that one. Sounds like the party started.
It does.
Sure. So, I think we need to think of it, keep different things in our head at the same time, which is hard these days. She said, I'll start with just the prosecutors. DOJ is getting hammered right now, and they're under a lot of pressure, and they're not looking all that great in the media. I will remind folks that there's thousands of prosecutors out there, thousands of federal prosecutors, and even more state prosecutors and local prosecutors out there that are doing great work, that are upholding the Constitution and go in without much thanks every day to do the right thing. And that's going on at the federal level too, notwithstanding what you see in the news. Then there's this other layer that's going on that is a kind of a separate channel. And there are vindictive prosecutions going on right now. It's plain to see. We'll see if the courts find that. It's a really hard hurdle to prove that in court. But there's no doubt that there's retribution going on. That makes me sad. It breaks my heart for an institution I love. But I also think that we would be naive to think that that is just going to sort of turn around anytime soon. And so I'm of the view we have to take reality for what it is and deal with what we have. And it's going to take a long time to rebuild that trust, I think, with the department. And it also may take some real reforms that we didn't need for a long time because we had strong norms, we had professionals that stayed within professional boundaries. But this may be another one of those situations where we come out of this the next few years. And again, I know I'm, keep talking about a Congress that's not doing much, but there are reforms we could make, all right, to help guard against some of these political motivated prosecutions, right? We place a lot of faith, for example, there's just actually some bills pending right now that actually might see the light of day eventually. I'm actually very hopeful that we place a lot of faith on prosecutors are going to the grand jury at the federal level. A lot of times those grand juries are not seeing exculpatory information, right? You could add some reform around that. You could have some more policing by the judges who are getting the returns from those grand juries. You could make prosecutors sign an oath, right, when they submit an indictment, right, that there was no political motivation. There's lots of things we could do to put pressure on the system and enforce those guardrails. I think ultimately where the real reform can happen is at the individual level where you have professional consequences, right? Because most of the people who are making choices that are ethically compromised, they're doing it for their professional benefit. If you make it not in their benefit, that can change the calculus, right? And so if we can discipline lawyers who are stepping out of bounds in a meaningful way, that may be where we're headed. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but I think we do need to just sort of be clear-eyed about where we are.
Very good. So we'll take one or two questions if there's anyone. Oh.
Thank you. Mr. Orr, in the discussion about racial gerrymandering, pointed out that some states, at least, are trying to evade the prohibition against that by using technology to evaluate a multitude of data points, which basically serve as a proxy for looking at race. By the same token, Commentary magazine recently had a very good article to the effect that the exact same thing is being done by our so-called elite institutions to evade the prohibition on affirmative action, looking at those same data points that will produce the same result as if they were still engaging in, and in fact, sub rosa are engaging in affirmative action. In each instance, my question is, if this sub rosa or covert activity produces the same result as an overt activity would have, isn't that easily seen through? How is that going to stand up?
I'm sorry you didn't ask somebody else. I don't know how it stands up, but you have an executive branch that is openly doing anything and everything to remove any sort of affirmative action, diversity, circumstances, whether it's universities or hiring at the federal level, but whatever. You rely on the courts and all the problems that we've talked about. I mean, ultimately, the courts have to say it. And if the courts aren't willing to uphold the justices or judges, aren't willing to uphold their constitutional oaths, then, where do we turn to? I mean, it's really frustrating. Cheri's exactly right. There are thousands of wonderful judges of different philosophical and political stripes. They try to do the right good, but circling back to the pressures on them, it's hard to see the majority on the U.S. Supreme Court right now doing much to push back on an agenda that any of us think is just fundamentally wrong. But that's not a good answer. That's the best I got.
So if we could take another question.
Yes, hi there. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. If an independent, nonpartisan judiciary is the ideal relative to the Supreme Court, would you be in favor of not term limits, but some kind of limits for a number of years on the Supreme Court, mandatory ethics that are enforced, or some other remedy for what appears to be a very partisan-leaning court? Chief Justice?
I'm actually teaching professional responsibility ethics now. Over the course of the history of this nation, the pendulum has swung. It has, and so often I hear people say, "Oh, this is such a terrible time in this nation's journey," and it may be, but it may be a great time depending on one's perspective, right? And so, certainly every judge and justice should be bound by a code of conduct and then therefore carry themselves accordingly. In terms of term limits or even how we choose judges, I mean, certainly the federal judges are appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. But in the states, many judges are elected. In North Carolina, judges are elected, whether appointed or whenever the vacancy happens. And so there's that piece as well. I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of term limits because the next time around, you get a judge in place that you like, and then they're out. They're doing a great job. I don't know that that's really the answer. I think the greater answer is people. I mean, in North Carolina, you have the right to elect judges, right? And you know that the president appoints federal judges, which means you have the right to elect a president who you believe will be electing judges who are fair and impartial. Now, I will say this, President Nixon nominated and ultimately confirmed then Justice Rehnquist, right? And he said to Justice Rehnquist, I really didn't want to appoint you. I'm hearing some things that, you might be not quite as conservative as I thought you were. But now I'm convinced that you're the right guy. But when you get there, I want to make sure that you need to do the right thing. And Rehnquist was there, right? And there was this presumption that he would have a certain bent. But over time, Justice Rehnquist and then ultimately Chief Justice Rehnquist became a very different kind of jurist. And often jurists do because the times change in some way. I'm telling you that's why the public really has a lot more power than the public believes that it has. Times only change if you say they're going to change, right? Or if the courts say they're going to change and you're not ready for them to change, they don't change, right? So people really have, the collective, we really have a lot of power and are empowered to shift the trajectory in this nation. It does shift, though. It shifts one way, And from one's perspective, it might be great, but it also shifts back the other way. It just always does that over the course of time. But the shifting is not inherent. The shifting happens because people shift differently also and decide the direction that they want this country to go.
Okay, so we are now out of time with this panel, but please give them a round of applause. Thanks you all so much for joining us.
He served as an advisor to the U.S. government's special operations, homeland security, and intelligence agencies, and spent 4 decades as an Arabic-speaking expert across the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Balkans. Mr. Nance is the author of 10 books, including the Terrorist Recognition Handbook, The Terrorist of Iraq, An End to Al-Qaeda, and Hacking ISIS Inside the War Against the Cyber Jihad. 5 of his books, Defeating ISIS, Plot to Hack America, Plot to Destroy Democracy, Plot to Betray America, and They Want to Kill Americans, were consecutive New York Times bestsellers. He is currently completing his memoir because he has not finished writing all of the books that he wants to write, I'm assuming. All right. And that is coming out to be determined on our current administration because it has to go through national security checks. And that is called I'm sorry, I'm going to mess this up. And I am a hot mess because I had to have a waiver to join the military because I have bad eyesight. So I really need like a magnifying glass for things. He is currently completing his memoir, Thinker, Sailor, Black Man Spy, Code Breaker, Patriot, Widower, I, a memoir of an intelligence warrior, again, set to be released when the administration gets through their checks. A frequent commentator on geopolitical and security issues across broadcast, radio, and print media, Mr. Nance was a longtime MSNBC contributor and maintains a large social media following. And in February of 2022, he left MSNBC to join the Ukraine's International Legion, serving in the Ukrainian Military Intelligence, I'm going to mess that up, Directorate, the 1st Battalion Legion Infantry, and the 3rd Battalion Special Operations. He participated in combat and intelligence operations defending Ukraine against Russian aggression for over 10 months. He is a native Philadelphian. He is a passionate advocate for democracy and the global fight against autocracy. Mr. Nance.
I'm going to sit because I have been traveling for 36 hours to get here, and there's no coffee. What's going on here? This is clearly not Portland, which is funny because I just did a podcast about Portland. So I'm going to spare you all a lot of time and get around to some of your questions because for those of you who know me from MSNBC, I was on MSNBC for 7 years as the intelligence and counterterrorism analyst, and then I slowly got drawn into the political analysis by Chris Matthews and the person who brought me to MSNBC, which is Rachel Maddow. And I was asked to come here, and I volunteered to come down here from Montreal. In fact, I just came from Egypt and then went to Montreal and then came here. So, but I was asked by National Security Leaders for America, which is a group that I work with. I did a tour last year around the southern states of the United States, and they are very, very senior military, diplomatic, and intelligence professionals who have come together on a platform for the defense of democracy in America. And it has become clearly much more pointed about their mission and your mission for everyone who is here in this room. And that is the nicest thing I'm going to say tonight, okay? From this point onward, it gets very, very bad. I don't know if any of you listen to me on the Stephanie Miller radio show, which is on Sirius XM, Free Speech. It says 6 million listeners a day. She's on for 3 hours. Her father was, is it George Miller, the guy who ran with Goldwater Miller campaign. And when I talk on there, they have recently, well, not recently, in the last year have given me this nickname, which is Shouty McShoutface. And that's because they literally go through the news and they look for questions that will just set me off like a rocket. And every show I go, wait, you chose that deliberately? And they go, yeah, we did. Because we want to hear your passion. Well, when I was on MSNBC, I was a very calm, cool analyst. It was just one of those things. I was there to deliver information. And over time, it became very clear to me that my former role in the military as a cryptologist, as a naval intelligence specialist, I was senior enlisted. I was not an officer. And as senior enlisted, in the Navy, as a Navy chief, that's what we call us. The Navy chiefs, which are chief petty officer, senior chief petty officer, master chief petty officer. See, we're gods in the armed forces, really. We are the institutional knowledge going up the chain of command and going down the chain of command. We are also the place where if something stupid is going on, we get our coffee cup, because we can't operate without a coffee mug, and we stand up and we say, that's stupid. Now, the reason that I'm giving you all these professional terminology, which is also, by the way, a very in-depth intelligence phrase that we use for people who are misanalyzing very clear information and indications, is because we have been in the stupid season for some time. And one of the things that I pride myself on is that I have just got to the point where I am no longer a political analyst, New York Times best-selling author, all of that stuff. I am just a Navy senior chief again. And you see how I'm holding my hand? This is a military thing called blade hand, right? And in the oldie days, when you made chief, or in the Army, master sergeant, sergeant major, Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, this is the symbol of power of the senior enlisted. And it's a holdover from World War II, Korea and Vietnam, when we could slap you. But we can't do that anymore. So what we do is we put our hands up. And the first time that I ever actually did that, recognizably internationally, was on air at MSNBC when I was debating, I can't remember his name, Boris Epstein, who was one of Trump's advisors in the first administration, and Donald Trump had just insulted the mother and father of who were Gold Star parents, right? And the soldier who had died was an Army captain who I dedicated my next book to, who gave his life protecting his troops when a suspicious vehicle had come to their checkpoint. And he made all the other soldiers get behind the barrier, even though that wasn't his job. He was the watch officer. He was just wandering around. And he took 3 steps and the car bomb blew up. And this man had the nerve to say in front of me, sitting near me, that Trump didn't have to say anything wrong, and there was nothing he did wrong in that circumstance. And I went completely off on air. And it set my pace for the rest of my career in news media, because I said, how dare you ever say this in front of me? And I got letters from chiefs and gunnery sergeants and sergeant majors around the world who said, you blade-handed that guy on TV. Did you know? And I had no clue I was doing this, right? I was just like, you know, I'm about to come across the table and slap you, which is the inherent story. But more importantly, it was I had reached a breaking point with being civil to people who were steeped in incivility. And as a chief, we are known for our, how can I put it, our very passionate, fluid, and colorful language. In fact, all we do is use passionate, fluid, and colorful language all day long. But most importantly, we reduce things to easily consumable and understandable language that any idiot can get, right? Because we deal with idiots. Or as I like to say, our principal job is we recalibrate stupid. And stupid comes in all forms. It comes from an officer who thinks he's doing the right thing on the basis of even 10 or 15 years of their career, these admirals or flag-ranked officers, or even the lowest sailor who just thinks that he knows it all. Our job is to make sure that they are in compliance with reality. And our reality is that if you're an officer, we will say it very respectfully, we will just tell you what we think. And that is why we have this entire class. 2 weeks ago, when Pete Hegseth, the person who they say is the Secretary of War, of which there is no institution legally, it is the Department of Defense. It was an act of Congress in 1947. You just can't say it. You can put it up, put masking tape name over the door. But when he called in all of the general officers, every officer that wore a star, from Commodore all the way to 4-star general, he also called in all of their senior enlisted advisors, which is people of my rank or higher, sergeant majors, master chiefs, senior chiefs. For each of these admirals, there is always a senior enlisted who is supposed to be the voice of reason and to give them a reality check. That's why they're there. I did a calculation on a napkin that in that room, there were 32,000 years of senior military experience. And we had a former major in the National Guard, not even the Army Reserve, who did one tour of duty out with another group, who is now going to lecture them about what it was like to be a warrior. Which is interesting because if you were to count the number of Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, Navy Crosses in that room, it would be off the charts, right? It would be like, I don't know, Donald Trump lecturing everybody who landed on Iwo Jima. It's just something you just don't do. You have to pay the respect. But someone asked me, they said, if you had been in that room as a person who has been involved with national security your entire time, all right, what would you have done? What would you have said? Would you have, it's our job to sit politely, but there is a time where you have to say something. And as a chief, we wear these symbols on our collar that are anchors. It's either an anchor with a star, which is what I wore, an anchor with 2-star, which is what my father wore, a Master Chief Petty Officer. And we have this phrase, when something is so horrifically broken, when something is so horribly bad, when you have a drunk officer who is steering the ship and has decided he wants to steer it into the rocks to see what happens because it might be fun, that's when you have to do this thing. We call it throwing down your anchors. And throwing down your anchors means you're going to put your entire career online, but whatever's coming out of your mouth next is going to be on the record, and it's going to be very colorful, it's going to be very direct, and as I like to say, or as everyone my rank likes to say, you are going to have a significant emotional event in your life. So I sat and I listened to Pete Hegseth's speech. And then what I thought was even more amusing was Donald Trump came in, and we knew it was going to happen then. And I know everybody wants to at least give people benefit of the doubt. I was a Republican for a good part of my life until I started listening to what their platforms were. Then I was like, what? No, I'm not like that. I was a Colin Powell Republican, right? And on the XY axis of what is far to the right and what is far to the left, Colin Powell and I now come down in this lower left quadrant next to Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, right? And Martin Luther King. We're all down here. Barack Obama, we're all down here in this quadrant. You know, Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, for God's sakes. So the reason I mention all of this is I gave thought to what I would have said if I had heard that speech. And at some point, someone is going to have to stand up and say, yeah, I won't use all of the colorful language. Are you effing kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is what you bought 32,000 years of combined military experience to come listen to some, 4-year major who is completely out of his depth. You may be civilian authority, but you are the wrong person for this job. If you had any decency, you would resign right now. And I would have said, I'm throwing my anchors down on this one, and every one of you chiefs and master sergeants and gunnery sergeants have better back me up on this. This man's a moron. He is the reason why we watch people carefully when they're driving the ship. There's always a chief watching you to make sure you don't think it's a fun idea to crash the ship into another tanker or to go onto a rifle range and start shooting wildly in every direction, or to give an order which will hurt someone because you want it done that way. The entire military history of America is steeped in a series of laws that are paid for in blood. In blood. People have died because of a bad case of stupid. And I keep using that technical phrase for somebody who is incompetent or who doesn't respect the sacrifice of all of those people who came before. And you're wondering, where's this leading? It is not leading to a happy place. I'm just going to give you fair warning right now. I'm writing a Substack. I have a Substack newsletter called Special Intelligence. And I have a podcast called Black Men Spy. And I'm writing a Substack right now because once a week on Substack, I do a podcast with two other people, two civilians. Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer, and Lev Parnas, Donald Trump's former Russia-Ukraine negotiator, who was cutting all of those deals when, trying to pressure President Zelensky into doing false accusations against Joe Biden and his son. Now, the reason that I'm on with them is both of those people went to jail before Donald Trump. They didn't go because they wanted to protect Donald Trump. Donald Trump had them prosecuted. They were way before Comey, now Bolton, Letitia James. They got prosecuted. Michael Cohen had a bad case of integrity, and that's what sent him to prison. He said he reached a point where he could not lie anymore and cover for Donald Trump. And he has spent, people said, well, how can you go on air with this guy? This guy, Michael Cohen, every episode apologizes for having been not duped, but seduced into the promise of what Trump does until he learned that the man has no integrity. He is transactional for himself. Same thing with Lev Parnas, and they were both prosecuted for it. This podcast, by the way, is called Unleashed. I call it Two Felons and a Spy. But we don't BS each other. And the reason I mention this is one day, I guess about 4 weeks ago, I had asked a very simple question. And I said, hey, Mike in left, straight up, you know everyone in this administration. They have known them for years. First question was, is Donald Trump going to unleash violence on American citizens? And they both said, no, he is not, based on what they know. ... He said, but he doesn't want to. He's actually sort of a coward. He doesn't like to use force. He likes to let someone else use force in his name. He does it Mafia Don style, right? He likes that. Even the mission to bomb Iran, he would have had to have signed off on that if he could be assured that there would be no failures, and that if there was a failure, he could blame it on somebody else, period. And then he would sign the piece of paper, and then he would say, well, it's Pete Hegseth's problem, or it's J.D. Vance's problem. That's the way he operates. These are from two people who have combined 20 years of day-to-day experience with this guy, so I believe them. So I said, well, if he's not going to do it, who's going to do it? Simultaneously, they both said Stephen Miller. And this discussion tonight is about Stephen Miller. Or as I named him on Real Time with Bill Maher, Baby Goebbels. Which is interesting because less than a month ago, he gave a speech right after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He gave a speech in which he stole the literal words from Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi, in the Horst Wessel speech. This Horst Wessel was a brown shirt who was killed by communists in 1920, and it was the entire reason that the Nazi Party rose to prominence. The song, the Horst Wessel song, was the official song of the Nazi Party. But it was just a predicate for them to seize power, put people into uniform, and march. That being said, Stephen Miller has made it very, very clear that he is going to recommend that violence be unleashed in this country. Malcolm, you're an intelligence professional. I'm sure you have some analysis behind that. I don't have to do analysis. I worked at the National Security Agency, and at the National Security Agency, we listen to people. And the rawest intelligence you can get is when Saddam Hussein calls his girlfriend. Because a dictator will always lie to his wife. But he'll never lie to his boo-boo, right? And when he makes that phone call, whether he's telling the truth or lying, it's original source. It gives me everything I want to know about their mindset. So I analyze what people say. Do not ever be fooled by policy. This administration says what they are going to do. They test the waters very early on. So let me give you 3 examples that I had bookmarked in my Twitter this week alone. Carolyn Levitt said 7 hours ago, the Democratic Party's main constituency is made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi and Secretary Kristi Noem repeated it, that the Democratic Party Antifa, which isn't a real thing, it's a phrase, that Antifa is more dangerous than MS-13, a gang which ran El Salvador for a while, Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang who nobody can figure out what their real reach is, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. And I have personally fought and done intelligence operations against all of those groups. I have written books about these groups, their ideology, their processes. When you make a statement like that, you are framing your opposition. Now, that's two different frames. You're Hamas on one side, illegal aliens, violent criminals, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah. What has happened to Hamas and Hezbollah in the last year? They were decapitated through lethal violence. Hamas wiped out through warfare. So, this was stated just one day ago by the Vice President of the United States. Because we have such a big problem with left-wing political violence, we really have to retrain the entire government to focus on the left-wing violence problem. My last book was called They Want to Kill Americans, the malicious, terrorist, and a deranged ideology of the Trump insurgency. I documented over 100 instances of armed violence perpetrated by the right between 2016 and 2020. And I just barely got January 6th into that. Violence in this country, 65% of all political violence that can be clearly identified comes from the extreme right. They laugh about how they are armed. There was many statements just made in the last 2 years of when can we use our guns? I have had people on the right say that they want the day of the rope, which was written in the Turner Diaries, which was the day they were going to hang all white liberals from lampposts and blacks would be executed. And if that sounds familiar to any of you, the Turner Diaries is the book that inspired Timothy McVeigh to blow up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, because that's what was done in the last chapter by the mythical character Turner. All of this is coming full circle. Timothy McVeigh would be like Kyle Rittenhouse. He would be honored amongst the opposition. So if you're like me, I used to be a conservative. I'm still pretty conservative. But more to the point, I love this country enough to be very afraid of the people who are literally saying in our face what they're going to do. So let me end that with this phrase just from yesterday. Trump announces his plan to deploy more military forces into the cities that weren't requesting it. We're ready to go in. There are so many cities, they don't even know we're coming. This is the militarization of America because they have this fantasy. I spoke to 2 journalists yesterday from the Portland Mercury. I had to do it as a pro forma formality to spell out to my podcast listeners that Portland was not on fire, that it wasn't Fallujah, which the president said a week ago, well, if it's not all this activity and action isn't happening there, then explain to me what I'm seeing on television. He was seeing loop footage from 2020. He lives in an alternate reality which does not reflect the wood on this floor. If I were giving an intelligence assessment of the president of Burundi and he was behaving in this way, we would be preparing for the non-combatant evacuation of our embassy, quite possibly classified intelligence activities to overthrow the government, or airstrikes, because this is crazy with a capital K. And the reason I'm being so frank tonight is because I just came back from a 10-day tour in Egypt. And you know what? That's a dictatorship too. But it's a relatively under control dictatorship. They don't do as much crony capitalism as we generally see here. Yeah, they overthrew a Muslim, the Muslim Brotherhood, and took control of the government. But being over there was like a fresh breath of fresh air. I dreaded coming back here. Dreaded it. Wondered what would happen at the border. Watching people being snatched off the street. And in case you guys haven't figured it out, we now in the United States have, by technical terminology, a Geheimstaatspolizei, a state secret police, which is the acronym of Gestapo. We have one. Don't let anyone tell you ICE is now not a secret police. They are now no longer able to be identified by person. They mask themselves. They secretly seize people on the streets, including American citizens. They carried out a raid in Chicago in which, I am not joking, they fast roped and rappelled guys out of helicopters onto the roof because it looked cool. They zip-tied 400 American citizens, including every child in that building, because they were black, and they said that they got 4 illegal immigrants. We are in a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous place. I wrote a book that's still in use in the United States government. It's on its 3rd edition, The Terrorist Recognition Handbook. And I get people asking me all the time. I had Christy Nome make this comment the other day about them being terrorists, liberals being terrorists, blah, 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 Hamas, Antifa being terrorists. No. One of the first things I wrote is civil disobedience is not terrorism. Protest is not terrorism, no matter what it's for. As I once said to a very famous neo-Nazi named Baked Alaska, right, social media influencer, I fought for the right for you to say any stupid thing you want. Just don't move into action. By coming out and starting to classify the Democratic Party or anyone, no Trump Republicans, anyone in the opposition who is anti-fascist, because arguably your argument is we're fascist and we don't like you calling us anti-fascist. By every measure from Timothy Snyder on down, we have a fascist government, which Benito Mussolini defined as el fascisti, the government, a dictatorship of the corporate far right, in which the government and the corporations work in unison to have an extreme right agenda, extreme conservative agenda. Now, I'm going to stop yelling at you for a little bit. The reason that I am calling attention to Stephen Miller, he made slip the other day that he slipped the other day. It was he who was recommending to the president which cities would be occupied, how they would be occupied, and what troops would be used. This guy is a danger to you and your families because, now, remember, I have my senior enlisted advisor cap on. This is going to spin out of control. And at some point, I'm just happy at this point, there has not been a gun battle between ICE and others. And there are people out there who will protect their homes. Armed men, no knock warrants, no knocks, no warrants coming into the house where American law and the Constitution is no longer applicable to you. I said this in my book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, which is really about Russia co-opting the conservative movement in the United States through the use of its intelligence agencies and Putin's oligarch money. And I made a very, very clear statement about this. We are not going to be a fascist dictatorship in the way that you all imagine. We are going to become what I call a constitutional autocracy. That's where you get the rights of the Constitution. It's a fig leaf, but only for those people who are on his side. The rest of you will be ruled over, and they will withdraw those rights from you. We've already seen it. They will use malicious prosecutions. They will use personal attack. They are now planning to weaponize the IRS. They have already stripped every major database in the United States government and are automating it with AI so that you are more easily trackable. Everything people said, that idiot that defected to Russia, Edward Snowden said about the National Security Agency, that's the one agency that will not comply. I can tell you right now, they won't, because the systems there cannot be oriented to the American public without it being very clearly oriented to the American public. And everything comes down to a human. We could vacuum up the entire United States communications structure, but you're going to have people who have to analyze and read the verbal printouts. And computers can't do that in the way that they think. But you can now create an alternate national security agency. For example, Border Patrol was using its 2 Predator drones flying over Los Angeles, conducting cell phone signals intelligence intercept missions over Los Angeles against American citizens using a system called Stingray, where they can intercept a cell tower, create a false cell tower, and not just sweep up your communications, pinpoint you to a person. Which means we're going to find out when all of this comes out in the wash and we have future tribunals, we're going to find out that everyone in Los Angeles was monitored. And it wasn't NSA doing it, it was NSA-capable aircraft that were sold to Border Patrol that was supposed to be looking for illegal immigrants or coyotes on the border. We now see signals intelligence missions being flown over Chicago. This is insane. It's insane. We are at a tipping point. And I don't want to take away anything that was said by the people here who have served in the courts and on the courts. This is beyond the courts now. I'm not crazy anymore. This is the worst part. I come off as a conspiracy theorist, but I don't have to because they're telling us they're doing it. They don't have to obey the law. They have decided they will decide what laws are the laws. And now we're talking about co-opting the United States Armed Forces. One of the things that I did that I'm proud of is that I'm very, very good at counter-information warfare. So when they brought the U.S. Marines to Los Angeles and had them out at the federal courthouse, I went on the Stephanie Miller radio show and they said, everybody kept saying, Malcolm, what can we do? I said, simple. Here's what I want somebody to do. I want somebody to go down there and blast nonstop the Village People song In the Navy. Now, we're talking about U.S. Marines. And if there's one thing that they do not want to be associated with, is the song In the Navy. And so I said, number one, the Army National Guardsmen will laugh at them, which is what we want. We want to see them laughing on the street. And number two, when they go back to their barracks, all they're going to be doing is singing In the Navy at each other, right? This is the way we insult each other. And sure enough, within the next day, somebody was blasting In the Navy. And next, somebody said, well, we have these ICE officers who are coming down there. They're in civilian clothes. They're wearing Carhartt and wearing Carhartt and wearing all these plaid shirts. And I said, simple. I said, I don't know who's hearing this. All I know is a snow blower and glitter it's just something you cannot get off, right? You have to throw that shirt away. Somebody described glitter as the herpes of the arts and crafts world, right? So last week I was talking about the inflatable frog in Portland. And I made a comment on Stephanie Miller. Excuse me, I don't want to see an inflatable frog. I want to see 1,000 inflatable frogs. And because you have to remove the inflatable frog, remove the power of what President Trump and Kristi Noem said were a city that was in flames and rioting. This week, 150 people have showed up wearing inflatable costumes of all types. I am also a huge advocate of the disco dance party on the riot line, right? Remove their power and show them for what they are by showing the world you are not how they describe you. That's called shifting the meta-narrative. Seattle on fire, offer discounts to ICE agents to buy lattes and donuts, right? Things like that. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of this is that this could all be moot in a matter of a week. I really feel I'm hearing from Lev Parnas's and Michael Cohen's contacts. They fully intend to levy the Insurrection Act. It is everything we've been seeing going on over the last 4 months has been a step-by-step, gradual plan, a lot of which was spelled out in Project 2025. But he wants this G.I. Joe cartoon image of American soldiers pacifying U.S. cities. This isn't going to go away with you writing letters. You know, I'm afraid to say it. The judiciary can say what they want. I have a feeling that they are going to start getting ignored on a level that none of us will be able to recognize. And so, once the Insurrection Act is offered, the key question is, will the armed forces comply? And if I could give you one last thing that we did in the last few weeks. So I was in Washington, D.C. throughout August when the National Guard deployed. Their biggest deployment area was the mall and then down at Union Square. So I went with a group called Remember Your Oath. Brand new group, didn't know what they were doing. And I said, hey, listen, here's what we're going to do. You're going to get all your American flags out. And they had the MRAP armored vehicles off to the side. And they said, you know, they had soldiers out there rotating. And some of them were very aggressive. Louisiana National Guard was hostile to any protester, which is disgraceful. So what we did was we started playing on a giant loudspeaker General Milley's retirement speech, the one where he says, we didn't take an oath to a king. We didn't take an oath to a queen. We didn't take an oath to a dictator, and we didn't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We took an oath to the United States of America, to the Constitution of the United States, and we were willing to lay down our lives to protect that oath. We played that nonstop for 12 hours. Every time the Guard would show up, if it was a new Guard unit, we'd shift 8 hours of nonstop Milley speech. It had a very interesting effect. Union Station is very crowded, but when we would play that speech from silence, virtually everyone would stop and listen, and people would take out their phones. And we found that we had a lethal weapon. Well, I mean, not lethal, but a non-lethal weapon to use against future Guard deployments around the country. I am also a big advocate of following them and playing the Imperial March from Star Wars or kazoos behind them, but, they didn't ask to be put out there. They don't want to be put out there. So the question that always comes to me is this, Malcolm, what's going to happen if they're given an order that they don't want to follow or that is patently unlawful? And as you know, because of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where an Army lieutenant was told to kill every living thing in a grid, and he mass murdered 240 women and children. And it didn't stop till another pilot, another Army officer, a helicopter pilot, landed between him and the massacre. That pilot had a base named for him recently in Oklahoma. Pete Hegseth overturned that and renamed that base after a Confederate general. That guy who showed the ultimate integrity of a soldier to the point where his act became military law. Every soldier has an obligation to disobey an unlawful order, and mass murdering people or shooting protesters or using extreme violence against civilians is not just unlawful, it's a war crime. Which brings me to my last point that I always write down. One of my favorite movies, because I also heard this was about the courts. One of my favorite movies is the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. Have all of you seen it? If you haven't seen it, your homework tomorrow or tonight is go home and watch Judgment at Nuremberg. One of the finest films ever made. Spencer Tracy is one of the 3 justices on the Nuremberg trials. But what I find the best part about that movie is he is not trying Nazi camp commanders. He is not trying Nazi Einsatzgruppen executioners. He is trying the Attorney General of Nazi Germany and the top 3 Supreme Court justices of Nazi Germany. And you know why he's trying them? Because, as they say in the movie, every law you pass made murder legal. You know, when Anne Frank was turned in by her neighbor, what she was doing for 3 years in that room, hiding, was illegal. She was breaking the law. The woman who they've determined it's one of her neighbors, all right, a woman who turned her in was actually complying with the law. Whoever called out Jews to have their property taken from them and have them sent to camps to be executed were obeying the law. The Einsatzgruppen group that were killing Jews were obeying the law. When the law gets twisted upside down, what are you going to do? Go to the Court of Appeals? I'm afraid, from a layman's perspective, I'm not, some of the very distinguished Juris Doctors we had here, and God knows, why am I following these people? They should all have been given a keynote speech here tonight. The point is, we're getting to the point where none of this is going to be ignorable anymore. We understand it, which is why you're in this room. It's your neighbors that don't pay any attention to the politics. This is going to have to be explained in very simplistic terms, the way a senior chief would do it. We have a secret police now. Call it anything you want. It's a secret police. You have a Gestapo. And they are going to start increasingly moving their activities away from illegal immigrants. They've already hustled up 400 American citizens, zip-tied them, no warrant, then released them. Women, children, men, elderly. They didn't care. What happens when that doesn't happen in Chicago, but it happens in Wilmington? Or it happens in a predominantly black neighborhood in Charlotte or some other place? What are you going to do? That's the question. That's another part of your homework. Think about what you're going to say to people. Because here's what I don't hear enough of. I don't hear enough people saying this, which is, what is wrong with you? What are you doing with that passion? Not, oh, this is bad. You have got to start screaming for the defense of democracy. I was born in a naval hospital in Philadelphia to a family that served 152 nonstop years of military service from 1864 until this year. When I see crazy, stupid things, that's how I said it. I was one of the first people on MSNBC to actually shout, what is wrong with this man? And people are like, oh no, you got to calm it down. We are beyond calming it down. You all have a task now. You got to go watch Judgment at Nuremberg, and you got to start speaking as forcefully when stupid things present themselves that will be a risk to the Constitution and your lives and the lives of your neighbors. You just have to start speaking up. So that's what I traveled from Egypt to tell you. And now, if there are any questions, let's make them short, because I know you guys have babysitters and dog sitters. Anybody? No, not that bad.
All right. Am I
over here?
Can you hear me? All right, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. You did just fine without the cough, you were saying. So good on you. I want to just mention, as you know, President Zelensky just came to the U.S. He's going to be meeting with the administration tomorrow, President Trump tomorrow. He's been on a campaign for weeks, months, to increase support, especially Tomahawk missiles. And as somebody could say that was expected, we got a call today from President Putin, and President Putin has apparently talked President Trump now away from Tomahawks being on the menu. He said after the meeting, he said, well, Trump has actually been seemingly leaning towards providing them. And then after this call, Putin said today, we really can't give up our Tomahawks anymore. Maybe he wants to use them in Portland. I don't know what the story is. But so my question is, one of the friends of, or participants of the Principles First summit last year, or earlier this year, was Gary Kasparov. And he commented today, just a few hours ago, elevating Putin with meetings and talks instead of arming Ukraine to fight is the same failed recipe Biden tried. Trump didn't meet with Hamas or Iranian terrorists to end the Gaza conflict.
Yeah.
He pressured them and helped Israel destroy their forces. The same should apply to Russia. Is this administration ever going to stand up to Russia? And are we ever going to see a vote on the bipartisan supported bill for sanctions against Russia?
Let me give you an answer from two experts than my own analysis, right? So Michael Cohen and Lev Parnas, we've discussed this. And it's simple. Anything Donald Trump does that looks like it's benefiting Ukraine is because he's putting it as part of a calculation that at some point there is money. And that it is usually that what they think is happening now is this is a pressure campaign against Russia. Trump absolutely, without any question, wants to lift all sanctions on Russia. But he can't do it politically, right? Unless Russia complies or caves. So what he did this dance. First, it was all hammers down on Zelensky, stopping intelligence, stopping weapons, to the point where even Hegseth was just cutting it off, right? Without even notifying the White House, because he thought the boss would like that. But this is a pressure campaign because there is $500 billion of oligarch money sitting in Russia that Donald Trump wants access to. And look, I wrote 4 times bestsellers about him and his relationship with Moscow. And in the one called The Plot to Betray America, I did a deep study of Putin as an intelligence officer, as a human intelligence officer, a case officer who would manipulate people. I went to his office in Dresden and just sat in the place where his office was. And what I learned from the scholars in Germany who had studied Putin in his time as a young KGB officer, the other guys in the office were just fat Russians who were eating sausage and drinking beer and biding their time so that they didn't have to go back to Moscow. Putin loved flipping people. He was a pure human intelligence manipulator. And he took that skill back to Russia when the Soviet Union fell, and he, liquidated the city of St. Petersburg. But he did it by manipulating the mafia to the point where he would say, hey, we're just going to give you 30% of everything, and you guys just don't get in our way. Or we'll kill you and use the KGB. And that's how he also became prime minister, then president, by helping Boris Yeltsin out, by manipulating people through his intelligence apparatus. So that money that is now sanctioned because of the Ukraine war, until it's given away to Ukraine, there's hundreds of billions of dollars in Russia. Putin may be one of the richest men in the world. They say up to 250 billion secret dollars in his own stash. Donald Trump is money obsessed. It has nothing to do with foreign policy. It has nothing to do with what's good for America. He wants access to that money. So now when Putin calls him and says, hey, you're going to give them Tomahawk missiles? And he goes, oh, maybe we're not going to give them Tomahawk missiles. It's all a pressure campaign. But Putin is a master of this. The first surveillance ever done of Donald Trump by the KGB started in 1977 when he married Ivana Trump. Her father for 10 years was the guy writing the reports for Czech intelligence. Every phone call was listened to. Every time the kids came over for summer camp, the KGB monitored everything. So when he came to Miss Universe in 2014, I believe, or 2012, Putin had wheelbarrows of analysis and recordings on Donald Trump. And it's very easy. The man is money obsessed. So we will manipulate him with money. We will get him elected president. This guy is the easiest person in the world to manipulate. That's why they're not getting Tomahawk missiles. But look, I fought in the Ukrainian army. I've seen Ukraine in action. I still fund my battalion. Ukraine is the most adaptive combat force on this planet. They don't need Tomahawks. If I was Zelensky, I'd be like, everything goes into the new Neptune missiles, long range. We're going to make our own version. Let's never rely on the United States again. I get guys in the Army or in the intelligence community go, well, that Ukraine needs us. Here's a good example of how they don't need us. When we started the war, we had AK-47 rifles from Russian stocks, Ukrainian stocks, and we had American M4 rifles that were being shipped over to Ukraine. Ukraine made a strategic decision 2 years ago. They shifted every rifle that was old, the old AKs, and American M4s is being phased out completely. They bought the Czech CZ-807 rifle. It is a very fine rifle for Ukraine shooting across 1 kilometer fields. This is the weapon. Better than the M4, way better than the AK-47. The entire Ukrainian army, 1 million men, is shifting to that one rifle. What does that tell you? They've cut the United States out of their purchasing. They don't need the stuff that we're sending. They love the Bradley. If I had my way, we would give them 1,000 Bradleys. But you know what they don't like? They don't like the strings. And now they need Patriot. Raytheon and Rheinmetall decided to make a non-U.S. version of Patriot for the Patriot launchers. But we are losing in sales, and Donald Trump is manipulating the defense industry to damage Ukraine to benefit Moscow. You had one question, sir? Yeah, sure. Look, Ukraine's the best army in the world right now, period, bar none. And I said that when I left Ukraine, I said I left because the Eastern Wall of democracy was pretty solid when you guys were holding the line. I had to come back here to help with the Western Wall of democracy, and it's crumbling over the last few years in my hands. Next, you had a question, sir?
We have time for one more question.
All right.
I wondered if you could speak to the power of AIPAC in Congress.
Yeah, well, AIPAC has power. It's an enormous amount of power. Look, AIPAC is not something that's cropped up recently, even though a lot of people have just glommed onto this. They are like all other political action committees, but it really started in 1967. You might recall the hagiography or the mythology, whatever you want to call it, of Israel. And I've been to Israel many times. Was started with the little guy versus everybody, right? The David versus Goliath. Fighting the Egyptian army, the Syrian army, all these other armies. And there started to be less of a need for unlimited, unwavering United States support when Camp David happened and they signed a peace treaty with Egypt. Suddenly you knew there would never be another all-Arab war against Israel. But AIPAC is the political arm which is designed to make sure that there's always support in Congress. I think right now people have overplayed its power, only in the sense that Donald Trump is being very cynical about his support for Israel. He says, I support Israel unlimited. And then in the next breath, he says, the 67% of Jews in the United States that voted against him, he says that he comes out and he literally questions their religion. Says they're traitors to Israel and traitors to their faith. When I was in Israel, one thing that I saw that was very interesting was there was an enormous political opposition there to Benjamin Netanyahu. That country is not all in the camp for him. But Donald Trump is playing this game. When he went over there and started that Trump-Gaza thing, I'm afraid to tell you, that's happening. It is literally happening. Yesterday, they made an announcement that the city of Rafah, which is the southernmost city that's on the Egyptian border, where the Israelis now are going to occupy upwards to 40% of the peninsula of the Strip forever. They're going to make it a no-go zone. But the city of Rafah, Trump announced that they were going to start rebuilding it right away into a modern, beautiful city. Literally Trump Gaza, which is what he said. Now, how do you sustain that against 2.2 million people? Now, not in a 25 square mile area, but now reduced to a 10 to 15 square mile area. I personally think, and I'm saying this as an intelligence professional, all of that talk about making them walk to Jordan through a secure corridor or trying to force them into Egypt, the Egyptians, by the way, are never going to allow that. You know there are 7 fences between Egypt and the Gaza Strip? 7, not 1. The Israelis had 3. The Egyptians do not want those people back. After Camp David, they gave Gaza away. They didn't want it. But I fear that something horrible is going to happen, that the paradigm's going to shift in a way that is going to make us look like, well, that is going to give legitimacy to the phrase genocide. Because if you force 2.2 million people to walk so that you can have, look, I've been all up and down the Israeli coast, from every inch from the south to the north. That strip down there in Gaza is pristine as far as you removing all the concrete buildings. Trump, when he retweeted that parody video of Trump Gaza, I think he took it very, very seriously. And it's dangerous. It will endanger the lives of all of us, of everyone going overseas, because we used to have good old, fashion terrorism. There are groups out there that will form that will make ISIS look like pikers. So, but he's playing these cynical games. It's not because he actually believes in AIPAC. No. There's money out there to be made, and that's what's happening.
Thank you so much, Chief. If everyone just give him a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you very, very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know we've gone a little long today, but I think the information that you heard tonight